All right, trying to get everybody a little bit of a chance to get connected here. Looks like most folks are getting connected, and we are so thankful to have each and every one of you here this evening. So glad to have Brother Delano Sherle with us, and in just a moment, I'm sorry, bro, I happened to accidentally mute your mic again, so you need to unmute it real quick. But so glad for everybody that has joined us tonight. So thankful for the good instruction that we have received during all of these sessions. And let me find out. I want to make sure we have Brother Sherle connected as the host. All right. And Brother Sherle is a CPA. He is owns his own practice, and he's got a very important subject for us tonight. Subject that we're talking a little bit before we got on. It's probably a subject that is needed the most, and sometimes people want to learn it the least, but so important to our personal lives, so important to our ministry lives. And so, Brother Sherle, we're so glad to have you with our North Carolina Ministry Momentum tonight. God bless you, and we'll let you take it and introduce yourself, and then look forward to the instruction. There'll be also, at the end, about 10 or 15 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I do have a question for you, Brother Watts. It's yes, telling me that there are people in the waiting room. I don't know if it, because I'm the host.
Yeah, there's 3 of them that came in while I was, okay. And I've got to admit them. They came in while I was talking. So we got them all going.
I just want to make sure that wasn't something on me. So yeah. Because it looked like it was asking me to admit them. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. As was mentioned, I'm a certified public accountant. I have a firm in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's it would take longer than we have tonight to let you know my story on how I got here, but I will tell you that a minister spoke it into my life over 25 years ago that this is what I would be doing. And I thought he was crazy. And I thought, no, I'm not going to work with churches. I was working for a larger corporation. But God kept working on me, and I was a little stubborn, but I realized he generally will get his way if it's something he really wants. We do have free will, but I did. So I started the firm a little over 20 years ago. We have a staff of 10 now. We are actively hiring, trying to hire about 3 more. And so we have churches all over the country, probably 44 different states in the United Pentecostal Church that we work with. And also, I've been a treasurer for over 20 years. So I know what it's like on the other side of the fence as well, because sometimes you talk to different accountants that don't necessarily work with churches as well. If they've never ran a church book and know what it takes and know the different nuances for churches, it is a niche that's important. And we'll talk about some of those things today and tonight. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask at the end, or we'll probably just wait till the end to take questions. But I tried to pick several topics that I thought would be relevant to such a diverse audience. I read some time ago that finances were the #1 reason that ministers leave, one of the #1 reasons they leave the ministry. I'm not sure if that's due to the stress of trying to balance the church needs and the low pay and the long hours, or I suspect it's all of the above. But we've worked with hundreds of churches, so I know that's always a stress point. So if I can accomplish anything, I hope I can bring some clarity and some answers to whatever causes you stress, individually. And so that's why I'm here. That's what I want to do. And I tell my staff, our mission is that we help people that help people. So if I can help you do your job better, and you can reach your community, then that's what it's all about. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 talks about being one body, but all having different, many parts. We're all needed. I'm not gonna teach a end time Bible lesson on Wednesday night. You definitely don't want me in your nursery, but we all working together, we can get all the different parts that the church needs. So I'm going to begin tonight, just again, no particular order. I'm going to start talking about the church financials. It is a legal requirement for a church to have adequate books and records. And that seems pretty common sense, but the Internal Revenue Code in section 6001 and state nonprofit statutes require that you keep adequate books and records. They don't define that, but I can tell you that a check register does not qualify as adequate records. You should have a balance sheet and an income statement at a minimum. And besides the legal requirements, the purpose of keeping good records is also just, to create good reports. Most times when I get a call from a pastor, their frustration is, even if they have a treasurer, that, hey, I'm not getting reports, or they're 6 months behind, or I just don't know where I'm at. And I'm just, maybe we're making financial decisions by just looking online and seeing how much money we have in the bank account. And that's doesn't give them a big comfort to know whether or not it's a good financial decision or not. So adequate and good records will help to give you the tools that you need to be able to make good decisions. And it also will make your year end easy and quick and less stressful. So, can't raise hands for me to see, but I assume if I asked and I said, who enjoys preparing your year end reports for the annual business meeting, that there would be very few people that would raise their hand. But if the books are properly kept, it should be a simple process. It shouldn't take weeks or months to prepare those. And it's just a matter of using the right softwares. We'll talk about different softwares here in a moment. And that will help you with those, putting those reports together. Most lending institutions or banks, they want CPA prepared financials. And they want those prepared according to what's called GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, GAAP. And so 4 levels of financial statements that a CPA can issue. There's the bottom line is prepared, and then you have compiled, and then you have reviewed, and then you have audited. Most times when I'm introduced to a congregation, this time of year, I'm still traveling around doing business meetings and presenting the financials to the report. And inevitably, the pastor tells the congregation that I came in and audited the books. And he means that in a generic sense, not a literal sense. I have to very kindly figure out how to correct that statement, because a lot of people will use that in, like I said, generic sense. And auditing is, most churches do not need an audit, and it would be cost prohibitive for most. So most just need what's called a compilation, which puts it in the proper format, verifies the balances, and that's what most people need. A review is a little bit more analytics, a little bit deeper dive and review the records, more verification. And an audit is much more stringent. You send out letters to donors and vendors and do sampling and that sort of thing. Really important to say here that none of them are designed to detect fraud. Sometimes I get called in and said, hey, we think there's someone mishandling funds. There are things that you can do to try to determine if that's true or not. But no, just because even a CPA is reviewing the books does not guarantee that if there's fraud, it's going to be detected. Especially if there's collusion, it can be very difficult to detect. But anyway, all of them will, they'll include a balance sheet, which for a nonprofit is called a statement of financial position. Your profit and loss, which again, because you're a nonprofit, is actually called a statement of activities, and a cash flow statement. And many times we add some supporting statements as needed. One of the important things is that we always reflect any restricted funds that are collected. So it's really important that you want to track how your designated funds are spent, and it's a legal requirement. If people are giving toward missions, you need to be able to demonstrate that all that money that was collected for missions went to missions. It's more often missions and building fund are typically the ones that are most are tracked. I recently was working with a church, and the pastor said, hey, look, I can explain missions, I can explain building fund, but Delano, the one group I'm afraid of is the ladies. Please make sure that we know exactly how much money is in the ladies fund and that it's a right balance, because they scare me. So we want to make sure always that the ladies ministry or in any other ministries, a lot of times the youth or different ones, that those are spent for their intended purpose, because really nothing destroys confidence from donors quicker. And then if they feel like they donated money and it didn't go to the intended purpose. Occasionally we'll work with a church where they said, hey, we had a building fund, we don't know where the money went. And that's just very detrimental to the confidence that people have. And if they don't have confidence, they won't continue to give. So that's one of the things that, and if you have money that's restricted and you need to use it for something else, and I've had a few churches I work with, had one recently where the building fund, they had a sizable one, but an issue came up that was important enough that they needed to divert those funds to another cause. And what they had to do was just go to the donors and say, look, we need your permission to spend on this instead. And they granted it in that particular situation, but just know that you do need to get donors' permission. And doesn't mean just because someone gave money to a specific cause, you don't have to accept it. I was at a church once and there was a fund that they had, and it was for stray dogs or something. It was something to do with dogs. And I said, what is this? They said, well, someone gave it. I'm like, well, is that in your mission statement, taking care of stray dogs? And they said, no. I said, well, then give it back to them and tell them to give it to someone that takes care of stray dogs. But so you don't always have to accept it just because they gave it to you, if it's given for a reason that's not in your purpose. I will say that, though, it's just important to track that. So most churches, when we start working with them, many of them don't have a balance sheet, or a statement of financial position. That it's just really just a list of all your assets, all of your liabilities, and then again, a breakdown if you have any restricted funds. That's in essence the main parts about that. So if they do have one, some of the errors that we will sometimes run into is that maybe they have a building and the treasurer will just list it on the balance sheet at whatever value that it's determined or whatever it's insured for. So usually it's pretty easy to detect that. If I start working with a church and they've had their building for 30 or 40 years and I see it building on the balance sheet for say $1.5 million, they say, well, we just figured that's what it was worth. Well, when we come in and we're trying to engage and prepare that balance sheet, we want to know the original cost. And that's one thing that on your balance sheet is the assets should be recorded at original cost. I won't get into all the depreciation entries and things that we do, but just know that, because using some sort of market value is somewhat subjective and is constantly changing. And so just know that the banks are aware that there's a difference between book value, which is what we call original cost, and market value. That's why they go and they get an appraisal when you go to get a loan to see what your building is worth. And then someone who's qualified to determine what that appraised value is. So just know that. Don't have a balance sheet where you just put on your balance sheet whatever you think your assets are worth. Instead, you would want to make sure it's the original cost. On the income statement, here's some common mistakes that I see. And I'll just kind of go through that list. A lot of times I will see expenses. I'll see an expense called credit card expense. Well, that's not an expense. That's just it needs to be split out. How much of it's travel, how much is meals, how much is ministry expenses or different things or dues. And so I'll oftentimes see just a large accumulation of expenses that just when the credit card was paid, and those need to be split out. Same thing with reimbursements. A lot of times they'll just say reimbursement expense, and that's not sufficient enough. It doesn't provide enough breakdown. Loan payments are sometimes just put on at the total amount, and it doesn't split out between the principal and the interest portion. And so that's something that we always look for. One of the things we also look for, common error, is when transfers are done between, say, a checking account and a savings account. A lot of times people will say, well, we took that out of the savings account for the building fund. So when we took it out, we put it to building fund income. Well, it's not income. You're just transferring it from one bank account to another bank account. And so you want to make sure when you're doing a transfer that you don't show that transfer should not impact. When I say a transfer out of one bank account to another, that should not impact any income account or any expense account, because you're just changing it from one account to the other. That's a really big deal. I was working with a church once. Actually, a bank referred me to this church because the prior accountant didn't catch that they were doing that. They had approved them for a loan. When they approved them for the loan, they assumed that they had income at a certain level. And what we subsequently found out, the bank had discovered, they wanted us to come in and determine how bad the overstatement was. But when they had transferred money from one bank account to another, they had overstated their income by about $300,000 a year. And so that was, the bank loaned them money based on the assumption their income was $300,000 higher than it was. And as a result, halfway through a building project, the bank called the loan and said, we're not going to finish financing this project. So they had to wind up having us fix the financials and then help them find a bank that would continue the project, which delayed it. I think it stopped for about 1.5 years. So that's one of the errors that we sometimes find, and you just want to make sure that transfers do not impact income or expenses. The other thing that oftentimes we find is that assets, when they're purchased, now let me just define that. An asset's going to be anything between $1,000 or more for most churches. If it's a larger church, they may use a $2,500 cutoff. But if you buy a conference room table for $2,500, that's going to go on your balance sheet as an asset. It's not going to get expensed. So a lot of times we'll find where a new sound system or a new piano or maybe some new video equipment is purchased, and it just gets expensed to the music department expense or something to that effect. Well, it's really an asset, and we want to show it on the balance sheet. By expensing it, it makes your financials not look as healthy, and that the banks are less favorable when you're trying to get a loan. So that's one of the things you always want to make sure that the assets are properly reported. And so it's one of the things that we're always looking for. If we're looking at reviewing the books and we see a Best Buy purchase for $5,000, we're going to say, hey, what is that? And we're looking to see if it's an asset that needs to be moved, because it makes your balance sheet look healthier, and it makes your profit and loss statement look better because you're not expensing those larger items. Other gap issues that will impact the financial statements. And this really affects churches when they're in the middle of a building program, but it's recording any donated assets and labor. We're not talking about people that are donating their time to be Sunday school teachers or ushers or things like that. But, if you're doing a major remodel and you have an electrician in the church that saved you $20,000 because he didn't charge you to run some electric, well, that's something we want to make sure we capture. So anytime that you're in the middle of a building program, track the value, even if it's people that come in, on Saturdays, hey, we're going to have a cleaning day. The general contractor is going to lower his price because we're going to come in and clean things up and hang drywall or do painting or whatever. Those are things that we would always need to know. And these are just common things that we look for at the end of the year, or if you're using another accountant, that they should be asking you about at the end of the year, and just things that you need to be aware of. One of the other things is, once you have good reports and you're comfortable with them, one of the things we always encourage churches to do is to have an annual budget, and many of your softwares will allow you to print a report out each month. It says, here's what we budgeted, here's where we're at. And it's really, I can't recommend it high enough. I will say, probably less than 5% of the churches I work with actually do set a budget every year and run off of a budget. But those that do have more money available in their bank accounts, they have less debt, and they have less stress. It is absolutely, I don't know how many Dave Ramsey fans we have out there. Maybe some of you think he's an idiot. I don't know. But I even know personally, he's got this little Every Dollar app. And just by using that on your personal finances, it creates so much less stress and makes life so much easier just knowing where it's going. And as well as that works on an individual level, on a corporate level, it's multiplied how much it helps. So if there's no other recommendation that you follow that I talk about today, I'm telling you, try it and just see how much it will help your church. You know, I had one particular pastor who was a little hesitant. His executive pastor wanted to, and he's like, he was afraid it was going to tie his hands, and he's like, you know, he didn't want to hear, well, we didn't budget for that. Well, that's not what it was used for. It was really just used for saying, hey, you know, if we budgeted these expenses based on this income, if income's less, where can we trim expenses? It just helped them make really good decisions. But in this particular case, our conversations within a year or two went from, okay, how late are you going to be this month on your mortgage, to, hey, you now have, you know, 6 figures in your checking account, and you know, now you're feeling comfortable knowing you can add staff, or they were able to replace the roof without incurring more debt or taking up a special offering. They were able to just pay cash for it. It really transformed their finances in just an unbelievable way. Just a simple tool of looking at it, and you know, many times the income was coming in higher than what they had budgeted for. And so when they would say, hey, we're thinking about getting this bus, or what do you think? You know, here's where our finances are, or where our budget is compared to our actual. And I'm like, well, absolutely. You know, tithes is up X number of dollars, and you could do that and pay cash, and you're still fine. So it's biblical. It's biblical to, you know, count the cost and know where your finances are, and you'll be much better off for it. So I just encourage everybody to do that. And if you need help setting one up, or using the software to do it, you know, it can really, it won't be it'd be a little bit of work, but it won't be as much work as you think it'll be. So I encourage you to try that. I want to talk a little bit about getting a loan. I don't know, you know, if anyone's out there and they're thinking about where they might need a loan. Again, this is where banks really want to make sure the financials are in good order. You know, banks will set their interest rate based on perceived risk. And so somebody that comes to them up front and says, hey, you know, we have CPA prepared financials, and this is what we're looking to borrow, and we've got all the homework done. The banks say, wow, these people, you know, they have a lot of confidence in what they're doing. Oftentimes what will happen is they'll send them their internal financials, and the bank will say, you know what, we can't use these. Well, you want to go to the bank with your best foot forward from the start. So I recommend that you get everything together and then go to a bank. They want to see 3 years of compiled financials typically, and at a year to date. So if it's July of 23, they're going to want to see 20, 21, 22, and then January through June of 23. And that's what they're going to want to see. But again, you want to get prepared first. They'll also, a lot of times they do want to see a budget. And so that's one thing. Another reason I encourage that is the banks like to see those. And if you're operating near a loss, or a lot of times the church will come to me. I love it when they come 2 or 3 years before they want to borrow and say, hey, you can look at it now, see what a bank, how they would view us. And I'm like, sure. And then we can say, hey, here's some things you need to work on in the next year or two to make yourself even look better for the bank. So oftentimes if that doesn't happen, they're like, hey, we're going to go to the bank in the next few months, present the financials. And I'm like, well, you know, the bank's probably going to struggle with loaning you as much as you want. But then we walk through and we say, but if you had to, which costs could you reduce? And we just present a supplemental schedule saying, hey, these are either discretionary or one-time expenses that are not going to be recurring. And we provide that to the bank and say, if you add these back in, then you can see where we'd be able to borrow the money that we need. So if you've been in a situation where you've not been able to borrow, or you've been turned down by a bank, understand that there are some options where you can present the data in a way, show the bank that, hey, example, maybe you brought in, maybe you spent $20,000 on guest speakers last year, but you could easily reduce that to $6,000. So you could explain that to the bank and say, we really have $14,000 more available for a mortgage payment than what these financials are reflecting. And it's just line item by line item going through that. And so, kind of telling the story behind the numbers. Don't assume that your bank is going to figure that out on their own. They a lot of times need a little bit of help. And so I've seen that where that made the difference between a church getting a loan and not getting a loan before. The other thing that you just want to be aware of is, you don't want to end the year with $1,000 or $2,000 in the bank when you're going to try to get a mortgage that's going to be $5,000, $6,000, $8,000. I've seen them $25,000 or $30,000 a month. Then the bank wants to know that you're keeping a margin. So sometimes I just tell people, hey, in December, just kind of don't pay anything late, but don't pay anything early. If you can put off paying something until January, I want your cash to be as high as possible on December 31st, which is when they're going to get that balance sheet. So things that we can just do to help make the bank's approval come a little easier. And you also want to provide the bank with your church history, pastor's resume, what the vision of the church is, put it all in writing, put together a nice package for them, because you're not just dealing with the loan officer that you're talking to, but you're also wanting to make sure that everything gets communicated to the committee that's going to be approving this loan. That's who your real audience is. That's understanding that and what are they going to be looking at. So each bank has different measures for how much they'll loan. Used to be we could loan to value, you could borrow 80% of what you needed. Some banks are now 70 or even 65%, where they want you to have 30 or 35% down. Some banks will loan maybe up to 3 times what a church's income is. So if the church has $300,000 of income, kind of a rule of thumb is probably $900,000 to $1 million is about where you're going to be able to, the max that a bank would want to borrow. It may go up to four times your income, but that's stretching it a little bit. They may have a certain amount per giving unit. So, know how many giving units you have. Just be ready with that information. And they're always going to want to know, how much your top donor or your top 10 or your top 20 donors give. And that's good to know anyway. I had a church one time that the tithing was about $600,000 a year. And it jumped in one year up to 1.8 million. But one person was given 1.2 million. So 2/3 of the tithing was coming from one individual for several years. So clearly you don't want to go into a building program or base something like that off of one person, because it only lasted for a few years and then it disappeared. That's why they want to know, on the other hand, I had a church that had, the largest donor was about $35,000 a year out of about 800. So that was a very healthy church, because if the top donor left, it really didn't have a big impact. And so it's good information to know anyway. And if any of you are in the process of getting a loan or you're getting ready to apply, I would just say, and don't get in a hurry, give yourself plenty of time, because I'm seeing now that it takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months to get approved and to get everything closed on a loan. So start early. Just the different regulations and things since 2020 are just taking a lot longer than they used to. So if you're 2 to 3 years away from building, and it's a good time to get started and getting everything lined up so you know how you're going to look in front of the bank. I'm going to switch gears and talk about software for a moment. There's a lot of different accounting software that will help you keep adequate books and records. The most widely used is QuickBooks. If someone were to call me and ask me they needed to get set up, that's probably what I would refer them to, because it's easy to use. It's easy to transition from one person to the next. It's easy to train people that are not accountants. It doesn't turn them into accountants, but it's just simple to use. There's a lot of nonprofit software out there. It's much more expensive it's much more difficult to use. Even when we're reviewing the books, we find oftentimes it really is quite cumbersome. But there's some good ones out there. It's just a lot of it depends on how experienced your bookkeeper is or your treasurer in using that software. But if you need help getting something like that set up, there's a lot of people that understand QuickBooks. We understand it. We have people that are certified in it. But I do always recommend a separate software for contributions. So I don't recommend using QuickBooks to track your individual contributions by person. I just want to know how much is tithes, how much is building fund, how much is missions. I don't want to break it down by person in QuickBooks, because the reason is there are softwares that's what they do, is they're contribution softwares. And so there's ones called Breeze, there's Servant Keeper, there's Planning Center, Fellowship One. There's one that's by an apostolic minister in Connecticut. It's called Faith Teams. And I have a lot of people that use that and really like it. One of the reasons I like, besides the fact that it's a different software for a different purpose, but it also helps with some internal control issues. So it's a separation of duties. You may have one person paying the bills and doing the deposits, somebody else tracking the contributions. And so if you're large enough and you can have enough people involved to separate those duties, that's really important for internal controls. It's always a danger, and I'll talk about it in a moment, where you just have one person doing everything without a second set of eyes on things. But the other thing about the software that's important is that is just try to use one database. If you're already using Planning Center, track attendance, and maybe who's on the pulpit committee, or every Sunday in music and singing, well, then use that for your contributions also, because you've already got everybody's information in. And the other thing is that use a contribution platform that will work directly with your online giving, and your contribution software should talk, is what I'm trying to say. So that you don't have to re-enter donations. Otherwise, it's a duplication of work. I was talking just about 2 days ago with a pastor, and when I said, well, what's your online giving platform? What do you use? He said, well, we just use, now I forgot it. PayPal. I said, well, PayPal is not a contribution. You can give online, but it's very expensive. The reports are very poor, and they don't do contributions. So someone has to take that information out of PayPal and then put it into, I think they were using Planning Center, and then it said, put it into it. I'm like, that's just an extra step, where if they give directly, I know when I give at my church, it automatically updates that contribution software. And then a person doesn't have to take that information and re-enter it. So we want to try to reduce the number of steps. And most churches now that have an effective online giving platform, maybe 60 or 70% of their giving is being done online. Well, if 60 or 70% of your contributions didn't have to be manually reported or entered into a software, that'd be awesome. So it's a big, you make sure that the two talk together. And so if you're already using, let's say you're using Breeze, you can ask them, well, which ones talk to each other, and that's really important. So any questions on softwares later, I'll be happy to answer those. Where I get a lot of questions is on record, is how long do we keep records? How long should we have to keep those? So anything that has to do with a loan document or proof of a loan was paid off, I say keep it forever. You always want to make sure if the banks loses their records, it comes after, says, hey, you still owe money in this, you want proof. Anything like property deeds, you want to keep those forever. One of the items that we never really addressed before, but in the last 2 or 3 years, we have now, and in common or best practices says, any insurance policy that you have, keep it forever, never discard it. And the reason that has become something that in the last couple of years has become recommended is many states, I think it's more than half of them now, have discontinued or have gone away with the statute of limitations on any sort of sexual molestation claims. And so because it's become such a problem in our society. You could be a pastor of a church for the last 20 years, but someone 45 or 50 years ago, all of a sudden there's an allegation against that pastor that was decades before you even became pastor. Well, the church can still be now sued for that. And you need to know who was your insurance carrier back when that happened. So because of that, some of the legal people that I work with say, always keep your insurance policies. Now, a lot of churches don't have that now. Believe it or not, there are companies that you can hire, and their forensic insurance, they basically go and they just track down old policies. They have to do that for this very purpose. And so because of that, we just say, always keep your insurance policies. Paid bills, 4 to 7 years. There's no specific rule. There's no requirement by the IRS, but it's good practice to keep it for a few years anyway. Do you need a telephone bill from 7 years ago? No one's ever looked at it. No one ever needed it. No one's ever questioned it. So keep them for a few years at least, and then you can discard them. Tithing, contribution envelopes, we suggest you keep those for 4 years. The reason is that if somebody gets audited, one of your members for contribution, then they can get their deductions can get audited for 3 years. After that, the statute of limitations is up. And so because they can get audited for 3 years, and you can file your tax return October of the following year, it's almost 4 years. So if you've got closet, you've got boxes and boxes of tithing envelopes from the 70s, have a bonfire, shred them, do whatever you want, but you do not have to keep them. I always hear a sigh of relief when I'm in person, and I say that because I go to churches and they have whole rooms full of boxes of paper. And they say, can I get rid of them? I'm like, absolutely. So I get asked that quite often. I want to make sure we threw that in there. Internal controls, I talked before about separation of duties. At a minimum, it's nice to have whoever's collecting the money and depositing the money, that's the money coming in versus the money going out, paying the bills. If at all possible, have that be 2 separate people. Always have more than one person count the money, always. You never want one person counting the money alone. And I'm still surprised, but even the last couple of years, even this year, I found a church where somebody was counting the money by themselves and they were taking it home to do it. And that absolutely should never happen, regardless of the size of the church. You don't want that to happen. Now, if you're a home mission church and it's the pastor and his wife, I understand, obviously, but you want to make sure that there's more than one person involved, and you want to have some sort of sign-off sheet where 2 or 3 people that are counting the money, they all agree how much money is there, and they all sign off on it. Somebody should check to make sure that deposit that week balances to that, and it's just really important. Because of that, sometimes money is sitting at the church, maybe from a Wednesday night or a Sunday morning, or it's counted. So I always implore churches to have a safe on the premises. I was literally at a church about 2 years ago, and we talked about this very topic. They said, okay, we're going to go out and buy a safe. It was a weekend, and that Sunday, before they went out and bought the safe, somebody broke in and stole the cash that they had sitting at the church. So had they just had it in a safe, had it attached to the floor, that would have been, that week's offering would not have been stolen. But the internal controls, it's so important. Nothing more heartbreaking than working with a church. And oftentimes it's where one person, again, they counted the money, they did the deposits, they wrote the bills, they reconciled the checking account. Nobody else saw anything. And that's really an opportunity that you just don't want to provide. It's not would that person do it, it's could they do it. And a lot of times it's like, well, this sweet lady's been doing this for 40 years, and everybody trusts her. The stories I hear, it's always the person that you trust the most and suspect the least every time with a church. I had this conversation with a church probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and they got another person involved in helping count the money. And immediately their deposits, their average weekly deposit went up significantly over what it had been for the last couple of years. Well, I mean, that's very suspect. And so it's really important just to have those checks and balances. Very, very important. Next topic that we want to talk about were some IRS issues. If you're a minister of a church, you should be receiving a W-2. That's really important. If you have guest speakers or somebody working around the church, you need to get a W-9 from them at the time that they perform the service and issue them a 1099 if you paid them $600 or more during the year. And so that's really important to get that W-9 at the time of service. We issue a lot of 1099s for churches, and it's every year they're like, well, they start tracking down people's addresses and social security numbers. And we're like, no, you're supposed to get that at the time that they're at your church speaking. So when you hand them the check, hand them the W-9, say, hey, can you fill this out for me? And then just keep that in a file of the church and you'll have everything that you need. Other IRS issues, if you're using a credit card or church debit card, just make sure you turn in those receipts. This is one of the things that if pastors don't like my advice, this is one thing that some of them struggle with a lot, but it's really important. If you were to get audited, or the IRS would get audited, the church would audit the IRS, were to get audited by the IRS, then it's really important to have those receipts and document because they want to make sure, hey, it's fine if you took out, a couple of your staff member or took out a couple for some counseling or whatever, and you went to a restaurant or a guest speaker. You just want to make sure you document, who was there, what the business purpose was, what was discussed, and that's really important as well. Payroll, housing allowance, it must be a board resolution. You can go to my website and we have one there you can just download. It has to be done annually unless you include language that says, hey, this resolution is for all future years until it's amended. And as long as you put that on there, until you have to make a change, you don't have to change your housing allowance. And you can include, it's pretty generous what you can include in your housing allowance. You can include, any repairs and maintenance, furnishings. If you buy a picture for the bathroom wall, you can include that. Mulch, flowers, anything landscaping, gas for your lawnmower, light bulbs, cleaning supplies, your paper towels. You can include quite a bit. And so the tax benefits there. We won't go into all the ministerial tax issues tonight for time's sake, but if you need help with that, please let us know. And as far as benefits, if you have more than one full-time employee, it's really, and you're paying for health insurance, it has to be a group plan. That's really important. So if you have 2 or 3 full-time employees and you're only paying health insurance for the pastor, because one of the things of Obamacare says if you do that, that's a taxable benefit to him now. It's not a tax-free benefit. And so this is one of the things that we also often find, especially with smaller churches, because it can be cost prohibitive to get group health insurance for a 3, 4, or 5 person plan. But if you're just doing that and you're just providing that benefit just to certain employees, just know that has to be added to their W-2. It can't be a tax-free benefit. If you are bivocational, and my understanding was that there's probably quite a few people tonight that are bivocational. I love working with bivocational pastors. But if you have a job outside of the church where you're near the FICA limit, I looked it up just before we started in 2023 is $160,000. If you are fortunate enough that you're at least making $160,000 on your secular job and you pastor a church, reach out to me offline, and there may be an opportunity where we can save you some money on your taxes by how we structure your church pay. It's something that would be worthwhile to talk about. Sometimes $6,000, $7,000, up to $10,000 a year, we've been able to save people on taxes by just how we structure the pay that they get from the church. And as far as benefits, and I'm going to be wrapping up here in just a few minutes so we have time for some questions. But if besides the budget issue that I talked about, I cannot encourage you enough to make sure that you're paying into a retirement fund. If you're not a pastor, if you're a treasurer, board member here tonight, make sure that your pastor, that the church is putting money into the minister's retirement fund for your pastor. This is probably one of the most neglected areas that I see. And I see the devastation caused by that, either when someone passes away prematurely, what it does to his family, and or when they're trying to retire because the church has always been in the building program or there's always been some other ministry. I get that. And I know pastors always want to make sure that the church is ready and moving forward, but you got to make sure that you're putting money into the minister's retirement fund. It is the best, absolute best thing for your buck as far as retirement plans. I mean, the only thing that's ever maybe even slightly considered getting a ministerial license is to be able to participate in the minister's retirement fund. It's a 403(b)(9). It's really important. The benefit of that for you is that when you retire, you can take part of your retirement and designate it as a housing allowance, and it's 100% tax-free. It's not even subject to self-employment tax. So that benefit alone is even better than a Roth IRA. So you want to make sure, this is the only time I tell a church board, do not listen to your pastor if he tells you that the church can't afford to put money into his retirement account. It's the only time I'll say, look, you got to do it anyway. I mean, just figure out a way. It's really important. So same goes for life insurance. I work with, just too many. One is too many, but too many widows who their husband was a pastor, didn't have enough life insurance. And it's so important because, just like their husband, they dedicate their life to the ministry. And if something happens to him, it puts them in a situation or the family where it's just a sad situation. So, and before I open up for questions, I'll just say, know your numbers, know what your average attendance is, know what your annual giving per attendee is. If you have, for example, if you have $100,000 coming in a year and you have 100 people, then you're bringing in $1,000 per person. That would be extremely low. But, in the apostolic church, anywhere in the $2,400, $2,500, maybe $2,600 range per attendee. So let's say it's 2,500. So if you have 100 people, it should be about $2,500, $250,000, a year in tithes and offerings. That's kind of a little bit of an estimate. The national average is $1,500 to $1,600, but because we teach tithing and offering so strongly, we're much higher than that. I've got churches that are between, some of them over 4,000. I have a few that are at 5,000 per attendee. And so that's 3 or 4 times the national average. So, but know what your numbers are, because then you can know how well you're doing. And there are things you can do that can increase your giving, but you have to be able to measure it first. So I'll share with you 5 things that you can do that, and then we'll open it for questions, that you can do to increase the amount of giving. And I encourage pastors, make your church a culture of giving. Jesus talked about it more than anything else. And so I tell you, most don't be shy about it. But the number one thing you can do to increase giving is teach on it. So I encourage pastors, do 1 or 2 series a year on stewardship. You'll get criticized for it, sure, but you'll get criticized now if you preach there's only 2 genders, and we never thought that would happen. But I at least do 1 series a year and bring it up often, because you will get what you preach. Number 2, make it easy. How many ways can I give? I know we're in a post-COVID world, so a lot of people do have online giving now. But even before that, tell them, look, the only way I can give to your church is if I have a checkbook or I have cash. I can tell you the 40 and under crowd, they don't carry cash and they don't carry a checkbook. So we want to make sure it's easy. We want text to give. We want QR codes. We want to be able to go on your website. As many different ways, have a kiosk in your foyer. Make it easy. And number 3, reduce the number of special offerings that you take in a year. I've seen when churches do this, when they say, hey, look, we're going to take up missions, and that's going to cover all these other missions offerings. Or, you know, if I see a tithing envelope that's got 25 different boxes that can be checked, people kind of lock up. They're like a cow at a new gate. They don't know what to do. You know, I call it the Cheesecake Factory menu syndrome. You know, there's 86 different ways you can order chicken off that menu. It's just, I just get locked up and I'm like, I just order whatever I had the last time because it's just too many choices. So reduce the number of choices. You know, maybe have just 4 or 5 different funds that people can give to. Churches have done this. I've seen them experience an immediate increase in their giving. And number 4, and this is so important. I've studied this before and I've seen other studies on it, and I've never found an exception to this, but churches that focus on missions have higher tithes and offerings, other offerings, than churches that don't focus on missions. It's an absolute statistical fact. And I think I first read the study 5 or 6 years ago, and I've started looking, and I've never seen an exception to this ever. And so when I see that churches are giving anywhere from 5 to 10% of their income out to missions, their other tithes and offerings per capita are the ones that are in the higher range of churches that I work with every single time. And churches that have started giving more to missions, I've seen just an immediate increase in the amount of other tithes and offerings. And the 5th thing that you can do is just have a nice, clean appearance. I read an article one time of a church. You know, I get the advantage, let me just say first, I get the advantage of walking into churches all the time for the first time. So I'm seeing it from a first-time guest. And, you know, if it smells fresh, if it looks fresh, if everything looks nice, you know, it's a very inviting atmosphere versus if it's, you know, dingy or dirty or like, oh, yeah, this was probably built in the 80s and they haven't done anything much to it. Studies have shown in one particular church that when they just gave it fresh, they got new carpet, they painted the walls, and made it look nice, they saw an immediate increase in their attendance of 30%. So that's incredible. Guests will come back when it's a nice, clean, inviting place. So those are just things that you can do. And so I'm going to look at the comments now, or I don't know if Brother Watts, if you have questions that came in. One flashed in front of me, and I'll see if I can find it here. Does the makeup of your church board matter? Well, that's a great question. I'm glad somebody asked that. You know, let me say this. I've seen a lot of churches that are now, they'll have some internal board members, but they also use some external board members where they may bring in, they may have a couple of pastors or that they have come in and meet annually. And that's with good success. I like that where there's a mixture of the two for a couple of reasons. One, if you're a church of 150 and you're trying to get to 400, well, then have a guy on your board that's already done it and knows, because he's going to be able to give you guidance and the other board members guidance that they're not going to have. You know, they might be good business owners, but how much do they know about, you know, growing a church? And the other thing, I'm not an attorney, so I don't give legal advice. And so, but when I do review bylaws, one of the things I always really like to see is a compensation, or actually not compensation, but a pastoral selection committee. And that, you know, maybe a few respected ministers, maybe a district superintendent, maybe people that understand the church, know the culture of the church, know the personality of the pastor, that can help guide that board. If something were to happen to the pastor prematurely or suddenly, you know, oftentimes I see where boards, they might be good business people, but are they really equipped to go out and find the next spiritual leader of that church without some guidance? I've personally been involved in situations where it was just a train wreck because the people just weren't equipped. And wow, I would have loved to have had those churches have someone that they could lean on. You know, someone well-known in the organization that could say, hey, here's a man of God who would fit well in this church and do well. So does it matter the makeup of your board? No, but I do like having a combination of outside and inside board members. That's just my personal preference. What were the softwares you mentioned? QuickBooks. Oh, I only mentioned QuickBooks for accounting. You know, if you have a specific question on one that you're using or considering using, we have several that are on one called Realm. I don't find that to be very user-friendly. But there are some other church softwares. If it's a smaller church, it might be okay, but as it grows, our recommendation is just always click this. Any other questions?
I have a question. Am I on, Brother Watts?
Yes, you are. Yeah, you just, anybody that can ask a question, you just need to unmute yourself, but for the user hand, you got it right now.
Thank you. I've got a unique situation that maybe you can give me some clarification, pardon my clock in the background, that I have not got a direct answer on. When I first got my license almost 40 years ago, I was instructed to fill out the Social Security paper that on ministerial earnings, I would not have to pay Social Security. So I did that. But over the years, I have been bivocational as well. So I have all my quarters paid in, and I am 63 years old. And I thought about taking Social Security early to help supplement my church income. And but the question I'm wanting to know, since I am exempt from Social Security, when I go to fill out the paperwork and I put my church income down, since I'm exempt from Social Security, do I have to put the housing allowance down since I'm exempt from Social Security? Because I know housing allowance is taxable for Social Security under normal conditions, but this is not a normal condition.
I don't believe that you need to. I don't believe that you need to. And here's why I say that. What we have found, we have a few retired ministers that are still getting nominal amount from the church. And what we found is they're also getting the housing allowance. We stopped reporting that on the W-2 because it just created so many problems.
Yeah, I don't even record my housing allowance on W-2s.
Yeah, typically we recommend that people do that until they retire, and then we say don't do that because it just creates so many problems. But you know, I answer that a little bit off the cuff, and to give you a definitive answer, I would want to research it. So reach out to me. They can put my email, or I'll put my email address in the message here.
Okay, that'd be great. I would like to know. Get a clear answer.
I would rather I'm 90% sure, but I want to be 100% sure. So I can't type my email in there without covering up my face. So if Brother Watts, if you could type that in there for everybody, it'd be great.
Okay,
Or Brother Watts, just send it out as a mass email like you've done the other things.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
you can.
Yeah, I can do. I'll just do that as a follow up.
Sure.
And then I'll just email you, sir, and refresh your memory on the situation.
No problem.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else that have a question? I'm sure we could probably be here from now to midnight, but we're going to respect Brother Sherle's time. But maybe somebody does have a question that came up. Again, you have to unmute your mic before you could speak.
When you said per attendee, is that 18 plus? That's a great question. That's man, woman, child, baby in the nursery. It doesn't matter. The statistics are it's per attendee. So yeah, thanks for asking. You know, there's two times when I've given except because the statistics they are such a good measurement of how a church, you know, whether or not the culture of giving. And as I mentioned before, I think the number one issue is how often you teach on it. But I did have one church that had really low numbers, and I think a third of the church were refugees. And I said, okay, that's a unique situation. Your numbers are going to be a little lower. And the other thing is, if a church is, you know, 8 years old versus a church that's 48 years old, there's going to be a little bit of a disparity. You know, the numbers are going to be a little bit different because, you know, newer churches, especially if you got a lot of newer converts, you know, they're not going to give like those of us that are, you know, third generation apostolic, where it's not a question that we're going to do tithes and offerings. And so, you know,
I think another helpful thing might be to define what most banks consider a giving unit.
Well, and I'm glad you asked that. each one has a different definition. I've seen banks say, hey, anyone who gave any amount. Oftentimes it can be as low as $50 for the year, which, you and I wouldn't consider that maybe a giver to the church, but they'll consider that a giving. And so what I always have to do is ask the bank, what is your definition of a giving? And so, but if you have that information where have a list of people and the amount that they gave, then once you have that definition, it's easy to do a quick sort, count them.
Yeah, because I've had some that said a whole family, even if both husband and wife were employed, but they counted it as one giving.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's one of those things where the banks, they all have their own definition.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have a question?
Brother Sherle?
Yes, sir.
This is Ronnie Engel from Kernersville. Would you feel the liberty to comment on possibly the dangers of pastors agreeing when a bank is putting pressure on a pastor to personally obligate himself on a church note, maybe just kind of give a heads up as to the dangers, the pitfalls of that?
Well, Ron, I'm glad you asked that. I would never recommend that that a pastor co-sign for the church. I had a situation because it was a very new church and it was a very large loan, over $1 million. And instead what we did was it's probably the only time that I worked with a church where that pastor actually did that. But what I did was I had the bank and always get anything in writing. It's got to be in writing, or they could not honor it later. But I did it for only I think it was just for 2 or 3 years. The other thing we did was they understood the pastor was a pretty dynamic. It was a Baptist church, but the guy got kicked out of his church because he was speaking in tongues. So I wanted to help him. And so he took about 1,300 people with him. So he started a church with 1,300 people, which is pretty incredible. And so, he needed a fairly large facility, he needed a large loan. And so they recognized pretty quickly, okay, this guy's pretty dynamic. If that many people followed him, what if something happened to him? So we just said, hey, we'll get a life insurance policy, make sure the church is the beneficiary. And I think just for 2 or 3 years, he had to co-sign. But that's the only time and that was basically, it was a negotiation. It was that or nothing. They weren't going to get the loan. But I do strongly recommend that pastors not co-sign for it. Church, because 2 or 3 years from now, let's say you're not the pastor, somebody else is and the church fails, they could come back on you. I wouldn't take that risk. So thank you for asking.
Great question. All right, we'll give opportunity. One more maybe question. We're at 5 after 9. So again, I want to be respectful, Brother Sherle's time. Maybe one other question.
Okay. Brother Sherle, what are is there any guidelines as far as the amount of a housing allowance?
Oh, I'm glad. That's a great question too. So the IRS says it's the lowest of 3 numbers. One is how much did the board approve in a resolution? 2 is your actual expenses. And the third one is it's a convoluted formula, but it's the fair market rental value of your home plus utilities and furnishings. And it's the fair market rental value of the furnishings. And so I've actually in the past 2 years, I've had to do this about 3 different times and you can go to Port Furniture Rental. There's several different websites where you can go on. Let's say you've got a 3-bedroom home and a living room and a kitchen and family room. And you can go through and say, this is how many rooms I have. And it will tell you what the fair market rental value of those furnishings is. And so that plus what your house would rent for, which is really easy now to find on Zillow. And then you add the utilities, and that would be the limit of how much you could take as a housing allowance. Now, and when you do that, that fair market rental value of those furnishings is significantly higher than what it surprised me the first time I actually went through, because I had a pastor that was really trying to maximize that housing allowance. And I said, well, let's go through this formula and just see what it really means. And it was pretty generous. It was like an extra $5,000 or $6,000 a month. And this particular guy, what he was trying to do was pay down that mortgage as quickly as possible and have as much of his income be a housing allowance as possible. And so I have a tax attorney that specializes in churches. And he said, yeah, you can go that high. The IRS sometimes will arbitrarily just reject it. He's seen that happen before, but it was very arbitrary. They didn't really have any rationale. But my thought is, as long as you have some sort of documentation that says, hey, I made a good faith effort to come up with and comply with your rules. Here's my calculations and where I got them from. I think it would be sufficient. I'm not sure your question could have been, I'm not sure this is where you were coming from, but sometimes people will say, well, how much of my income can be designated as housing? You know, bivocational people, oftentimes everything that they get from the church is designated as housing because they have other income from outside sources. And what the church pays them is just enough to cover their housing costs. And that's okay. I've sometimes heard before where people say, well, I don't know where this comes from, where they say, well, I've heard only half of the church minister's income can be a housing. That's not true. There's nothing in the IRS code that limits the percentage of income. So I wasn't sure if that's the direction your question was coming from. So I want to make sure I address that. But I have, especially in bivocational, I have many ministers where 100% of what they're getting from the church is a housing.
If you don't have a mortgage? Your house is paid.
Yeah, if your house is paid for, first of all, good for you, but you still have real estate taxes, insurance, repairs and maintenance, cleaning supplies. You still have a lot of expenses just to live in that house, and you still get a housing allowance to cover those expenses.
All right, man, those are some good questions. And I don't know, I took a ton of notes from the session tonight. And Brother Sherle, we're so thankful for you taking some time to spend with us this evening, to be able to share a lot of principles that impact so much of our lives. And we will send out an email relative to how you can be contacted via email. And just of note, we have recorded this session. And so hopefully Brother Brent Grubbs is getting very close to having archive ready from the sessions previous to this, and then we can get this one done very quickly. It will be in a protected place on YouTube that we will email you when it's ready. We'll email you a link, and you'll be able to access all of the archive sessions up to this point. And so hopefully that should be coming very soon. But God bless all of you for joining together with us tonight. God bless you, Brother Delano, as you continue, Brother Sherle, excuse me, as you continue working and helping us. Amen. And God bless all of our NC district ministers. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the opportunity, guys.